we wound up with about a 30% reduction in the amount of water being applied to still meet the crop demand and the water holding capacity. Same source of water, same field, same crop. In fact, a very small portion of the water only has to pass through the device. And
Just the
then the
field.
resonance from that will actually change all of the rest of it.
Wow.
And it's like, oh, yeah, well, how does that work? Don't know, but it does. And we can measure it. I mean, it's not even $1 an acre over the expected life of the equipment. I mean, I'm a regenerative ag consultant. I use a lot of biological products, plant nutrition products, lots of really good stuff. There is nothing that provides an ROI like structuring the water.
Mm.
Absolutely nothing. It's not even close.
Welcome back to another episode of Cultivating Change, everyone. I'm your host, Alex Corey. Today's episode is on something dear to my heart, which is regenerative agriculture. I got into health from organic farming, microgreens, permaculture, electroculture, all of the little experimental techniques. And today's guest is a career farmer. That's what he went to school for. His name is Chad Wall. Got introduced via the Wellness Enterprise and our friend Patrick Durkin. And he's been through large scale conventional agriculture and slowly sort of experimenting and getting introduced to the subtle energetics that is structured water and the profound sort of ecological impacts that can have on scale and the practical aspects of what farmers see who have huge plots of lands with large crops and what just changing your water can do coming from a lens of like traditional pesticides, glyphosate, genetic engineering, and shifting away from that and just seeing if you just pay attention to the type of water what can happen at scale.
We wound up with about a 30% reduction in the amount of water being applied to still meet the crop demand and the water holding capacity. Same source of water, same field, same crop.
Cool. I appreciate you joining me this morning, Chad.
Yeah, thank you, Alex.
Yeah. So we got connected from our mutual friend Patrick Durkin, Wellness Enterprise, on coherent and structured water. And then I am always looking for my background is in agriculture. That's kind of how I got into health. I don't know how much of this I told you when we chatted first, but essentially, I got introduced to water from organic agriculture, first in Hawaii, or first in New Hampshire, then in Hawaii, and then I landed in Asheville, North Carolina, and I had a little greenhouse with we were doing some electroculture, some experimental stuff, herbs, and then microgreens. And that's kind of how I got dropped into the world of water. And I've just the intersection of fundamentals of nutrition. So food, obviously, food production, and kind of just how to combat a lot of the problems we're facing today on large scales. And I'll let you go into that. But if you could just give a background of yourself and how you got into water and kind of what you do in agriculture, if you would, please.
Sure. Well, I grew up here in West Texas near the New Mexico border in the Panhandle, semi-arid, um, some rangeland, a lot of cropland. And as a child, we did not have irrigation. And then into my more mature years, just prior to my going away to the university, the area had become a lot more developed with irrigation water to produce crops. Because the consistency of being able to make a crop, in production agriculture was whether or not you had the availability of water to water the crop. And so, but we also began to see even at that point in time that rainwater was not the same as irrigation water. You could get a little bit of rain, and that would do a lot more for the benefits of the crop than a lot of irrigation water. And so, so those were just things that we were becoming aware of that everyone was witnessing is that, irrigation water beats the heck out of no water, but rainwater is a whole lot better. And, not only economically, but just again, I'm going to use some terms that we didn't know at the time, but energetically and biologically, the irrigation water was not nearly as good as the rainwater. And we knew that, but we didn't know what to make of it. It's just, it's just the way that it is. So I went off to university, got an undergraduate degree in agriculture, a graduate degree in agriculture, and particularly in grad school, I started studying sustainable agriculture systems, which was, a very eye-opening experience compared to the agriculture that I was accustomed to. And so my intention was always to get back to the farm with, some great wisdom and insight to be able to apply to continuing to progress the family farm. And so um, got married, got my wife out of school, and finally made it back to the farm and started applying all of my great newfound knowledge and started learning very quickly that most of the things I had been taught at university were not true. And that's not actually the way that the system works. It made us very good consumers
Mm.
of what the industry has to sell. And I'll save all of my thoughts on that for a different discussion.
Oh, I
But
would I would appreciate you letting them slip in as much as
Uh,
possible, actually. But yeah,
well,
go for it.
one of the things that it led to in using genetic modified materials for cropping seeds, and then the widespread use of the herbicides, particularly glyphosate that we were using. That's actually what led me into the water journey even a lot deeper. Was there were some things that I already knew about the water and the differences that I've described, but we were using a lot of things to treat the water to make it um, less conducive to reactivity with the chemicals that we were using. So to improve the efficacy of things, you would you would apply a lot of things to the water so that the herbicide would do what it was intended to do. And that led me to questioning, well, what if we just used better water? I mean, I'm not only buying chemical, I'm buying all of this other stuff. And so that led me to questioning, well, what if we caught rainwater? Or what if we, found a better water source? Or what's the difference in our water sources? And I mean, the rule of thumb in the industry was here's what you have to put with this herbicide in order for it to effectively work and or for us to stand behind it. And when I say stand behind it, it's like, the labeling and all of the guarantees, it's like that was the thing that shed so much light on this journey in the beginning, was that it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And you raise your hand and it's like, hey, I spent a lot of money for this and I still got the same problem that I had before I did all of this. Well, that's your fault because you didn't treat the water right, or you didn't do this, or you didn't do that. It's always your fault. I mean, it's like our stuff works, you just didn't do it right. And I'm like, well, that's not really a solution because it's costing me a lot of money to not actually accomplish what I was trying to accomplish. And so it blows me away that that was the first generation of this technology, and we're like a dozen generations in now, and everybody just keeps lining up for more of it based on the fact that it's the next thing is going to
Right.
fix it. It's like, well, the last one didn't work. It almost got us where we wanted to be, but it didn't really get us where we wanted to be, but it gave us enough evidence for us to buy one more generation and spend a little bit more and get a little bit deeper into the problems that are being created, because every generation is creating more problems,
Right.
because everything is getting further and further out of balance and we're losing more and more biology in the process. And so, anyway,
Can
that's
you
but
give me a sense of scale and everyone a sense? That's always the issue when we talk about food production. Like, what are
mhm.
we talking like? So what were you seeing at that stage initially of like how many acres or hectares, however you measure it, and kind of scale and like what percentage of costs are you talking about? Like, I just give people a little glimpse, myself included, because I've never done big scale agriculture. I've always done organic small scale. What are you talking about for sort of crop sizes, or when you say agriculture, give me a little snippet of what you mean on average.
Well, most of what I have been involved with now as a consultant and producer, as well as the cropping that I grew up doing, it's thousands of acres. I mean,
Mm,
we farmed about 4,000 acres at that point, which was, not a small operation, but not really a large one either.
yeah.
That's a pretty small one now in this part of the world. I mean, 4,000 acres, especially conventional. And when I say conventional, I mean with all of the latest and greatest technology.
Yeah.
4,000 acres is pretty small
Gotcha.
farm these days. But by and large, that's not food production either. That's the rest of that story is that's commodity agriculture. That's cotton and corn and
Yeah.
wheat and sorghum. And, we don't really grow soybeans to speak of in this area, but those are the kinds of crops that I'm referring to in commercial, what we call broadacre crops. So
It's like large monocrops, so
that's
to
right.
speak.
That
Yeah.
it's typically a monocrop, very little diversity.
Yeah.
The rotation can be all over the board, but it's primarily one season focused on primarily one or two crops that
Hmm.
are grown in a monocrop culture with all of the latest and greatest, modifications to genetics, if you will.
Yep.
Not sure how accurate that is either, but it's what we're told. So we'll,
Well, true. Yeah.
it's what we'll go with at this point. But in any event, a seed that has been manipulated or modified in a way that you can spray, some sort of non-selective herbicide over the top and the plant survive. It doesn't mean that the plant flourishes. The plant just doesn't show symptoms that it's sick, as
Right.
opposed to the other plants that are not capable of handling that very quickly become sick and usually to their demise, unless they're a plant that has become pretty resistant, and then they don't show much demise either. And so then we need a new generation.
Which is
And
why they always keep combining the
and a
more and more
new, yeah,
toxic. So you get
exactly.
2,4-D mixed with
And
glyphosate, mixed with
that's right.
dicamba. Yeah.
Another generation. And anyway, one of the growers that I worked with very early on in the consulting portion of this that I've done, couldn't have said it any more plainly than he did when he was expressing his grievances. One day he said, sometimes I feel like the guy that sells me that stuff comes out here and tells me how great this is going to be, and he sells me all of the stuff that I need for this to do this amazing job on my farm. And it doesn't really do what he says that it was going to do, but it creates all of these other problems. And then
Hmm.
he shows back up and he sells me a remedy for all of those other problems that were
Hmm.
created. And that doesn't really solve that problem either, but it creates more problems. And then he comes back and he sells me the solution for those problems. And then next year we start all over. And I said, yeah, how long do you want to do that?
I think that you just encapsulated my view of the entire petrochemical industry,
Hmm.
both for anything that's chemical or oil based for farming and pharmaceutical. It's like
Absolutely.
you were so far away from the initial root problem because you just
Sure.
keep having to manage symptoms of it's almost the same as the human body. If you the way you just
No,
described
absolutely.
agriculture, you're just branching off different symptoms to which you have to find problems, and no one remembers the initial root problem.
Yeah. Well, and we're so far from why people wanted to be involved in that. I mean, and I don't, I'm not saying that the medical industrial complex, just like the petrochemical complex and the big agriculture complex. I mean, it's not an accident. That's the
Right.
thing, is that, this has been taking place for decades, generations, potentially. These plans have been being put into action. And, you're a lunatic if you talk about it openly because it's not socially acceptable to talk about it, even though everybody senses it and has an idea about it. Very few people will actually say what they've witnessed or what they've experienced because,
Yeah.
it's socially unacceptable. And it's not because all the people that are involved with it are bad people. I mean, it's, they're
Sure.
trying to do
Yeah.
what is good. They're trying to be helpful, but I describe that as they've just become very good students of the wrong thing.
Right.
And it does not matter what your intentions are if what you're doing is producing the wrong outcome because you do it really, really well.
Right.
Well, It doesn't matter how much you know about doing it well, it's not going to produce the outcome that you're looking for. And
Right.
so again, that's what was, you know, that's what came to light for me, the divine intervention and the things that I was pursuing to show me that's not the way that it works. And,
Mm.
and for whatever reason, I was one of the very early adopters that saw, and it was more of a responsibility issue for me is what really shifted it all for me was I had a crop that had a horrible weed infestation. And as I described earlier, it's not the chemicals fault that didn't work because we have all of the science, and yada 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 that says that it works. And of course, the guy who's at the field scale level, I mean, he's just a mouthpiece. He doesn't really know anything except what he's been told to
Right.
bring forth and tell everyone. And again, I'm not saying they're bad guys. They're just students of the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But but my issue is that, I did what I was supposed to do and I have a horrible weed problem. I mean, like, maybe an unharvestable crop. Well, it's not our fault. So then they want to look at your records. Well, okay, you bought the chemical, so we can validate that. And then did you buy all of the things that, I mean, there's no proof that you actually put it in the tank, but
Right.
they want to validate that you actually bought it. You have the records of purchasing everything that you should have done, which I did. I mean, I wasn't looking for a failure. I mean, I wanted to make a good crop, so why would I not do what they were
Mm.
telling me was the best thing to do? So, I did the best thing that I knew how to do. And so once we proved all of that, had to go back and forth all the while, I mean, the crop is just doing what it's doing. And then the response that I get back is, well, okay, it looks like you did everything right and it just didn't work, circumstances beyond anyone's control. So we're going to give you the cost of your chemical back. And it's like, that's great. You gave me $5,000 worth back and I've got $100,000 problem,
Yeah.
so whose fault is that? And so then I'm going, hey, you know what? Maybe that's my fault because I actually believed that that was going to provide what I was looking for. And
Mm.
so anyway, a couple of experiences like that. Another one being, well, what if we use better water? And, no answer, no answer, no answer. Do I have to treat the water with all of this other stuff if I had really pure water?
Mm.
No answer, no answer. I mean, I finally knocked on that door long enough and loud enough to finally get a response back through the guy that I was talking to at the field level who said, we don't really care. Our position is we don't really care what you use for water. But if you want us to stand behind the chemical, you'll add this, this, and this to the water.
What were you having to add?
Ammonium sulfate and some surfactants. I mean,
Okay.
so I mean, it is, and again, that might not be the case everywhere because,
Sure.
it depends on total dissolved solids in your water and
Yep.
all kinds of things. But getting that water where it can be the appropriate carrying medium.
Right. So I had to stick to the plant, to the
Well,
weed,
and
and
not only
surfactant,
that, it needs to be, a certain pH in order
pH,
for
yeah, all the
the
chemistry.
the plant to utilize it correctly. And, so anyway, I'm not saying there's no merits to that. It,
Sure.
it was just that all of those things were just, ringing in me something different, saying,
Yeah.
is this what we need to be doing? And again, my contemporaries by and large were going through the same things and oh yeah, that's just the way it is. It's no big deal. So why did it cause me to question things differently? It's just as a different path that I was supposed to take.
Yeah.
And so once I got that response to, well, we don't care what you do, but if you want us to stand behind it, you're going to add this, 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 and this to it. And I'm like, well, I don't really see that it's all that beneficial for you to stand behind it anyway. It needs to work, and it needs to work at a way that I can afford to use it. And so that led me to RO water and doing my own
Hmm.
experiments with putting in a commercial RO unit, making, several thousand gallons of RO water routinely so that I could use that for my carrier water for my spraying solutions. And we saw right away that significantly less cost and, at least the same or greater efficacy without adding all of the stuff in there. We just, we had good water and we had the chemical and we got good results. But, again, that was, I mean, when I started doing that, I was really already at the end of my interest in doing all of the GMO stuff and spraying
Right.
over the top. And, I was already headed down a different path. But that's where it began, and that's what, that coupled with all of the other things that we had been witnessing about water. I started looking for water filtration for my home, for my family,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
wanting to remove the contaminants that were in the water. And then that's actually through that is where I got exposed to structured water and not really understanding what it was, not being familiar with all of the terminology that was
Mm.
used to describe it, but understanding that it's definitely different. And so that led me to a deep dive into structured water and what does it really mean and how do you produce it and how does it interact with the environment that it's in and all of those kinds of things, which then eventually led me to, well, I see that there seems to be multiple ways to do it. The most natural way, to me, seemed to be a flow form rather than
Mm.
trying to create frequencies or anything else. Um, utilizing something that creates turbulence based on the water's own movement to free the bonds and then impart some new information to it, all while it's, flowing such that it doesn't have to have any other energetic inputs added and it doesn't need servicing or any of those other things that
Yeah.
led me to what made the most sense to me was a flow form because that most simulated a natural phenomenon of changing the water. And so started playing with, flow forms. Through a relationship with a manufacturer, I got introduced to Patrick and the Wellness Enterprise. And
Mm.
then, we determined over some time that we were very like-minded and
Mm.
trying to find the same solutions and and wanting to do more good in the world and for the world, and so we started working together, and then that wound up leading to testing and trying lots of different products for our applications, and then eventually having someone to manufacture the Aqua Energizer for us because that's really what we wanted. I mean, essentially, we started manufacturing the Aqua Enter. I mean, I say we, the wellness enterprise. My involvement was just the field trials and the inputs on what my understanding of how it needed to be and how it needed to function and all of those
Yeah.
kinds of things. And so,
What did you see in the initial? So whenever you're doing your initial trial and error, and yeah, the terminology, I completely agree. I still have an issue with this. Like everything else in water is very chemistry based, and pretty like hard and fast terms. And you get into structured water, and you're like, no one can seem to nail this. Like it defies the almost defies the data or the left brain reductionist. You're like, I can't really describe what this is.
right,
Like there's no precise because it kind of shifts and it's very dynamic. But what were your initial experiments you ran? What were you seeing whenever you just started introducing flow forms at all? And so flow forms, I'm assuming you mean as water would move in nature.
correct,
So either, vortexes or curves, not straight 90-degree, 45-degree angles, I'm assuming.
correct. Yeah. So, well, initially, I thought, well, okay, I need to figure out whether they're, because just like you described just now, there's not really any good data to support things. And again, especially if you've, adopted the university model, which most of us this day and age have, whether we actually attended university or not, we've adopted the model of how brilliant science is and how brilliantly you can use science to prove everything that you want to prove. And I really like some of the contemporaries that I listen to now who speak about that in regard to actually science and the science theory is you make stuff up and then you try to prove it. And then if it doesn't work out the way that you theorized, then you come up with a new theory, which just means you make more stuff up to explain why it didn't work the way that you thought it was going to. And, and how far down the road in the new theories are we because we keep not being able to prove the initial one that we
Yeah.
was actually going to be the deal. And so anyway, that's a whole nother fascinating conversation. But point there being is that okay, well, what can I do if I don't have the data, I don't have somebody's analysis to show me what it is and what it's not and what it's doing, and well, and I'll just have to try it. I mean, the price point was such that, it's not a make or break. I mean, I don't like throwing money away, but it's kind of like the RO unit. I mean, I don't know how you're going to find out if this is going to work. Nobody's going
Right.
to tell you the answer, and unless you just try it. So we got Flowform, which is actually a portable device, and brought it in and just ran water through it out of the tap and tasted it and experienced it and could definitely tell something had changed. That's one of the interesting things about being around this water, even with multiple different devices. I mean, we obviously believe that the one that we have is the best because
Right.
we developed it to be that, but there's a lot of them that are good. I mean,
Yeah.
in fact, I would contend probably all of them that say they structured water probably do to some
Yeah.
extent.
I'm
And
with you
and
to some extent.
and
Yeah.
and that's something that I've never met anyone who could not sense. I mean, I have never met a single person who actually took water and poured it through a device like we use that could not taste the difference.
Yeah.
And they don't all describe it the same way. They use different terminologies and interpretations, but everyone can tell the difference. That's amazing to me. And then
Yeah.
if we think about how sensitive we really are as an instrument that we've been led to believe we're not, what greater sensitivity can we really have than to trust ourselves in knowing the differences between things because we've experienced them.
Yeah.
So anyway, we did that. We could tell the difference. I had a daughter, my oldest daughter at the time. We called our water snob because she didn't like the tap water at our house. So everybody else thought it was great. It's well water that is unadulterated for the most part.
Mhm.
But she just didn't prefer it. She liked a particular water from town that was only available at a particular place, and it wasn't the kind of water that you want to buy to stay hydrated,
Yep.
you know. And so, but that's what she really liked. And so, she got that occasionally, and the rest of the time she stayed mostly dehydrated because she just didn't enjoy drinking the water
I
that
think
was
that's
there.
most people. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So I had her come sample the water, and of course, she sniffed it and expressed her concern for what the trick might be. But she went ahead and tasted it and then just drank it and was like, "That's amazing. Where did it come from?" I was like, "Right
Mhm.
there out of the tap." And she's like, "No way." And so, okay, well, there's our first experiment, and my science says that there's something to it. I don't, may not be able to explain it, but there's something to it. And so then we advanced into putting one on the well so that it was treating all of the water that was coming to our property, the things that we were growing as well as the animals that we were watering.
Yeah.
And we had a horse that would consume water as long as water was available and he was in a stall, he would consume water. He was that, the terminology in the veterinarian world was he's a I don't remember what the actual term was, but basically they know that it's not good. They know that it's an issue. They can't identify what it is exactly, but he's diluting himself with excessive water,
Mm.
and flushing minerals from his body
Yep.
because he's just constantly urinating. I mean, literally, this horse would stand in front of a water tub and drink a mud hole. And by that, I mean he would drink until the trough was gone and just pee a mud hole between his legs continuously. And there's nothing that you can do. Again, the science says, well, that's not good for him, so limit his water. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I get it. I get it, but I don't think he's drinking water just because he ain't got nothing else to do. He's drinking water because something's going on and he's trying,
Right.
that's the only tool he's got to fix it. So anyway, so we were constantly monitoring his water because and we didn't like having the mud hole all the time and didn't think that was good for him either. So, we were constantly trying to figure out how to balance that. I didn't tell him that I structured the water. I didn't tell any of the other horses that I structured the water, but I put a device on the well, and that horse within a couple of days completely changed and never went back to drinking the water the way that he had been. So my daughter comes in and was like, "Hey, Tom's off water." I'm like, "Oh, that's great. What's going on with Tom now?" And, again, that wasn't my intentional experiment. A lot of the things that I have learned have not been because I had the insight on how to set up the experiment. We just added it and lived, and then looking back on it, it's that aha of, oh wow, yeah, that actually correlates with when we changed this or did that. And so,
Mhm.
that began to lay more foundations for there's something to it. And I don't, it's not placebo for Tom, I'm pretty sure, because
Yeah.
I didn't tell him, but it changed something that definitely had an impact for him. Um, maybe if I'd gone out there and told him, then the placebo effect would have even increased it. But, I don't know if horses have the ability to create their circumstances the way that
Yeah.
humans do. But anyway. So we continued on from there, and then, based on my agricultural experience and the things that I was doing, it's like, where we are, water is the most important resource that we have. It's the most misunderstood, probably. It's probably the most adulterated because of the things that we do. And so it would be great to get this into irrigation because that would help us to not only conserve that resource, but make that resource more valuable to whatever it's being applied to, whether that's, the people or the animals or the plants that are utilizing that water that's being applied, they're going to be much more effective and efficient. And so we should get that into the irrigation world. And we've had limited success with that. And the reason that I say limited is because very early on, we were thinking about how to measure things to know the difference. And it was really hard to come up with a good quote unquote scientific way of analysis because it's a tricky thing when you really get into understanding what's taking place energetically with the water and how it's resonating and how it's affecting the things that are around it and how
Mm.
the things that are around it are potentially affecting it. You start getting really deep into the weeds on how do you even set up an experiment to prove that? I mean, it's, because what we saw in initial irrigation applications was it had an effect on stuff where the water wasn't even being applied for a certain amount of feet. You could just see it around.
Almost like it was creating a field.
That's right. Around the perimeters of the field, it was changing the water beyond where the water was being applied.
Hmm.
It's, okay, well, how do you explain that and how do you measure that? And so, but what we were able to do because of an overlap with another agronomist who was working in the same field, um, he had some water sensors in a field and a lot of growers are utilizing these to help them schedule irrigation intervals.
Yep.
So basically, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but essentially, you have probe devices that have readings that are being taken at different levels in the soil. And so you can see how the water's moving. You can see what your irrigation or a rain application does for movement of water in the soil. And then you can also see how your plants are using it, well, what your root depth is because of how deep the water is being
Mm.
utilized at a rate that exceeds just the infiltration rate or so you use all of those different parameters to gauge what is my water holding capacity. Is does the soil have enough water added to it that it can actually hold for the plants
Yeah.
to utilize? Because you don't want to run it off and you don't
Right.
want to run it through. Both of those are wasteful. So trying to balance, the water holding capacity with the crop demand so that the crop has everything that it needs to not have a shortfall in
Yep.
its water demand. So anyway, that technology was being utilized in a field that we had put these flow form devices on the center pivot. And so just if for those that are not familiar with the center pivot, that's the way most irrigation is applied out here. It's It's really efficient. It's not quite as efficient as subsurface drip, but there's a lot of things about it that are probably advantageous over subsurface drip, and some things that are not, but
Subsurface drip would just be like running drip tape right under the
under the
surface.
soil. That's right. Yeah.
And what is a center pivot? So can you describe
A
what that
center
looks like?
pivot is actually an overhead pipe that stems from a central point, which is the center that it
Hmm.
pivots around. And so essentially, they're typically a quarter of a mile long. They can be any length, but typically a quarter mile sprinkler sets on a quarter section of
Sprinkler.
land.
Yeah.
And so you take a 160-acre square
Yeah.
and you turn that into a 120-acre circle, 125, I mean, depending on exactly the length. But essentially, if you completed a circle in the center of that square that touched every border, then, you would wind up with somewhere very near 120 acres of 160, depending on, where your right of ways are and all of those kinds
Yeah.
of things. But pretty roughly 120 acres. That overhead pipe comes well, the water is pumped underground, or the well, you could have a bore well that's, very near the center so that the water's not having to be pumped very far. Most of them now have multiple wells
Yeah.
because one well will not supply the water that's necessary to apply the amount per acre that you're trying to apply. But
Yeah. What type of volume are we talking about here? So to just water like on a daily basis per whatever for that same unit of measurements you just gave, like how much water are we talking about?
depending on what you're trying to irrigate, would determine how much water is actually required. Most people around here would say that 500 gallons per minute through that pivot is is good irrigation water. Now again, we can get into the quality and all sorts of other things that may not necessarily be beneficial. But bottom line is just based on volume. It essentially translates down to how many gallons per minute per acre you
Yeah.
have in order to do an effective job of meeting the crop demand.
Yeah.
But again, there's a variable in there based on what your water holding capacity is and, what the organic matter in your soil percentage is, because a very slight change in organic matter completely changes the water holding capacity. And so, anyway, all of those things go in, but bottom line is on average, they're going to be from 250 gallons a minute to
Mhm.
1,000 gallons a minute
Mm.
for one of those center pivots that's covering essentially a quarter section, or the irrigatable part of a quarter section.
Cool.
And
Okay.
so anyway, that pipe comes out of the ground at the center point. It has an anchor there that that causes the system to walk around that essentially, and then that pipe goes overhead at approximately 15 feet up in the air, and then every 180 or so feet, typically 7 towers, it's going to have a tower that holds that overhead pipe up,
Mm.
that has wheels and electric motors and gearboxes on it, and all of that's controlled from the control panel that now you can control with an app on your phone. I mean, I could sit in my house and pull up my app and see which sprinklers are running and what speed they're on and what the pressure is, and I can reverse them if I want. I can stop them. I can turn them around. You can do all these cool things from the control center now. But the bottom line is that overhead pipe is just walking around in a circle based on the towers that have tires on them, and you set the speed of how fast it walks to determine how much, precipitation equivalency is
Yeah.
being applied to the soil based on, again, plant demand, water holding capacity, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So we had applied these flow forms on that overhead um, irrigation system, not really, not really planning how we were going to measure it, other than we just thought it would be beneficial, and we were hoping the Lord would show us how to see what those benefits were. And so late into that season, the farmer called me who had that device, or had those devices on his pivot, and wanted to know what I thought about the crop. And I was like, well, it looks great to me. He said, well, I said, why do you ask? And he said, well, that's what I thought, but I noticed when I paid my utility bills that I'm substantially less than what I have historically been on that field. And I just want to make sure I'm not missing the boat because I'm looking at the water um, evaluation instruments, the probes that I was describing. The probes are saying that you don't need more water. So I'm still applying more than what they're saying because I can't believe that they're saying that I don't need more than I need. And I'm already way less than what I historically am. And so I'm scared to death that I'm not giving this crop what it needs, but it looks good to me. So, and I was like, well, yeah, it looks good to me too. So, maybe our water is much more effective than it has been in the past. And so that's what kind of led us into the paying attention to it. That actually turned into the other agronomist who was doing the same thing has sold droves and droves of these devices because he was the one who actually collected the data and
Yeah.
saw for all of the other growers that he was working with, you guys need to pay attention because we wound up on that field. We wound up with about a 30% reduction in the amount of water being applied to still meet the crop demand and the water holding capacity. Same source of water, same field, same crop. I mean, so we essentially wound up with one of those scientific things that we could validate, even though we really didn't have the insight to set it up that way. And the reason being, and I think I shared this with you before, is that trying to do that out in an open field and measure the results is very hard to do because of all the variables.
Right.
Can't do it by can't do it by crop performance because crop performance and the way that a crop turns out in any given time is dependent on so many things.
Yeah.
There's no way to make a controlled environment out of that. Even in a greenhouse, it's very difficult to make a controlled environment. That's what we're led to believe, but it's generally because of the propaganda that is causing us to focus on the one aspect that someone is trying to get us to believe.
Right.
It's not really, you know, crop performance is a very hard parameter to follow things based on. It's the standard and it's the norm and it's what everybody wants to talk about, but it's very challenging because if you really understand what's going on, there are so many variables. And so in a field environment, not an enclosure, if you get rainfall, that skews everything. So,
Right.
nobody wants to not get rainfall, but when you're trying to collect the data that we're needing to validate what these devices are doing, you don't need rainfall because rainfall messes everything up. So, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at, for our data collection, we were fortunate that it didn't rain because we didn't have anything to mess it up. And we actually got that 2 years in a row. And
Wow.
so after we figured out what was going on there and we expanded our research to other places where we had more of these devices, I mean, where we had more of the soil measuring instruments already in place, we started adding flow forms to places that we already had historical data. But there again, you can't use crop performance to validate what you're trying to do. You have to use these other parameters. And so
Yeah.
so that led me to the position of being in my description that if you don't have a way to measure the water that you're using now, you really don't have a way to know whether you've improved it or not,
Mm.
except what you feel like. And there
Right.
again, most people make a decision based on what they feel like, not empirical data. They may
Right.
say, I only want the data, but what they really are going to do is make a decision based on what they feel like. So if they
Yeah.
feel like they believe your story, they'll buy what you're selling. If they don't, data doesn't really make any difference, even though everybody pretends that it does. It's no
Yeah,
different.
exactly.
It's no different in agriculture. And that was what was mind blowing to me is that I'm like, well, this is a no-brainer. I mean, we have actually validated how valuable this is. And in an irrigated farming situation, there is no greater input cost than the irrigation water. And then that varies from place to place. But if you are applying irrigation water, by and large, that is your most expensive input. and the one that you have the least control over,
Right.
essentially, other than how you can utilize it to make it better, which again so that put me in the camp after we got the data and we were, oh wow, this is amazing. Well, so what did the farmer do with that? He put them on every system that he had because he actually saw the data and walked through the experience. Now, has he been a super great proponent for all of his neighbors? Nope, because he don't want to have that uncomfortable conversation either,
Yeah.
because you can't explain what it's doing or why it is. So it's like, I'm going to receive the benefit.
Yeah.
I don't want everybody to look at me like I got three eyes, so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah.
And and I'm the guy going, "Well, I don't really care if they look at me like I got three eyes. I'm going to talk about it anyway." But it's amazing how that conversation goes. So if we look at that from a sales model, I really, I believe I'm a good communicator. I'm not really a salesman or a salesperson. I don't really enjoy the sales process. I've
Yeah.
never been one who really, I'm not after accomplishing my goals by selling things. I'm more and always have been in the camp of this is what I know, this is what I believe, this is what I think would be beneficial for you. I can make it available for you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the whole process. And so when you think about that from a sharing the technology, it's amazing that, and it doesn't really matter whether you're talking about consumers or agriculture people either, but
Yeah.
it has been a little bit mind-blowing in seeing it in the agriculture realm of knowing what the input cost for irrigation water is.
What
And
is that? Yeah. For general framework, like, is this tens of thousands of dollars? Is this
oh
like,
yeah. Yeah, I mean
um,
it's not hard to spend $100 an acre on irrigation water. And sometimes you could spend way more than that. Again, it just depends on a lot of different factors. Cost of water retrieval, depending on how deep your water is, what
yeah.
your fuel sources are for retrieving it, but I mean, and you could be a whole lot less than that at the other end of the spectrum if you had, if you were pulling water from a stream that was supplying lots of water, or if all
Yeah.
you had to do was open a gate and, let some flood water onto your property, then, I mean, there's a lot of variables, but by and large, if someone is pumping irrigation water, it's a very costly input. Now, again, it's the difference in making a crop and not in
Yeah.
in a semi-arid environment or an arid environment for sure. It's why so much irrigation happens in the desert. Why is there so much pretty generally high quality irrigation water available under the desert? Well, I think it's because we're supposed to use it to regreen the desert, but that's
I would
just,
agree with you. Yeah.
yeah, that's just my opinion. And so, those are the things that I'm always pondering is, okay, I mean, that resource is there. I don't think we're supposed to be using it just to make some money for ourselves. How are we supposed to be utilizing that to have a much greater impact on an area that is well beyond the area that we're applying the water to? And
Yeah.
we're working on some things in that realm, and I think, hopefully making some progress in understanding how to do that. But I think, the water cycle, I don't think there's any place that's intended to be a desert. That's just my perspective. And, it doesn't mean that everything is supposed to be a rainforest either, because
Yeah.
rainforests have their own problems. But I think based on the way that we are stewarding things and, you know, some climatology and some local market driven things and some soil type things, I think there is some historical evidence that, bless you, that all things are not the same, and not supposed to be the same everywhere. But I don't think anything is supposed to be a desert.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's supposed to be that anywhere, and pretty good evidence that it didn't always once. It wasn't always that way, and I
Yeah.
think that,
I would agree. And I think the
that
jet streams are shifting, and
yeah,
we're going
no,
to
I agree.
keep seeing odd,
Sure.
well, odd to our definition of the last 180 years we've been measuring things, but historically, probably cyclically, like
Sure.
regreening of the Sahara or of our deserts in the US, and just jet
Yeah.
streams will change and water patterns, whether man manipulated or natural, will change.
Sure. Yeah. No, I agree.
I'm so we're talking about the water forms you're talking about are I'm assuming the larger versions of the Aqua Energy. So just like the bigger ones, not like I have this thing, which is a personal one.
Hmm.
I'm assuming you're talking about bigger forms.
That would be an incorrect assumption.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, again, that's one of the things that really makes you scratch your head, and that's where you lose the conversation with most people, is because we're actually applying four of those devices like you just
You're
described.
applying four of this handheld device per tower.
Yeah, I
Or
mean, it's not a handheld device because it has fittings on it so that
sure.
it can
Yeah.
hang on the pipe. So
Yep.
those overhead pipes typically have what's called a drop hose, which is a rubber hose that comes from that pipe down to much closer to the ground because that makes your water use efficiency
Yeah.
significantly greater, especially in a semi-arid environment.
Right. Doesn't
Low
evaporate.
low humidity, high winds. You want to get that water as close to the soil
Yeah.
as you can so that you don't have a lot of evaporative loss. But anyway, you have hundreds of those drops from one end of that system to the other. So on a quarter-mile system, those drops are typically spaced anywhere from 40 inches. That's really uncommon, but a typical spread range would be anywhere from 60 to 100 inches between all of those drops. So you have lots of drops on that quarter mile. And so typically, because the science, and you described this earlier in our discussion, we've been led to believe chemistry science about water. And the only way to
Right.
measure anything about water is what's in it. And then you do something to it, which is typically filtration of some sort, passing it
Yeah.
through a media that causes something to adhere to that and pull it out. And then you measure what you have left. And
Yep.
that's your brilliance, is that you can measure what's there. You can either add something or take something out, and you can measure it again and know that you accomplished something. When you're talking physics and energetics and vibration
Right.
and all of these other things, can't measure it that way. Doesn't really matter how it's vibrating before or after. I can tell you it's going to be better one way versus the other. But anyway, so that then that's a developing thing. Actually, I don't know if but very recently there was an independent research study done on the Aqua Energizers to validate four different parameters of what was actually being changed in the water itself. So
No, enlighten me.
not what's being added, not what's been taken out, but actually essentially the energetic life force that is in that water and how it has been escalated or improved based upon just passing through a device. And so that's great, great information that doesn't get most people's attention because
Right.
they think they understand science. They understand what they've been taught science is. And so they really struggle with anything that's outside that realm. But
What
where
were
that
they looking at? Do
conversation,
you remember what it was? Like what the parameters were
um,
even?
um, no, I think if you'll go to the Wellness Enterprise, you can find it.
Okay.
I
Are
can
we talking
certainly
about like
send it to you.
the Borvis scale with chi or
Bovis, yeah,
radiesthesia,
Bovis readings.
H3O2?
There were two or three things on there that were things that I was not familiar with
Okay.
as in regard to how to utilize those for measurements. Again, I don't have any doubt that it's not valid measurements, and it's done with instrumentation. I mean,
Yeah.
there are instruments that are doing this, and we're learning more about instruments, but subtle energies and things that are
Mhm.
not extremely black and white are very hard to measure because it's hard to validate what your measurement is. Again, it's
Mhm.
pretty easy if you say, "Hey, Tom changed the way he was drinking water and he's doing better now." And it ain't because I told him we were changing the water. You
Right.
know that Okay, but does that mean that everyone else is going to be impacted the same way? I don't know. It's good, good possibility, and very likely that it's not going to harm them. So why not?
Right.
But again, the consumer is very conditioned and or mind bred, you might say, into the consumerism that they are comfortable with, all based on reported empirical data that may or may not actually be what they think it is,
Yeah, I would say,
or even follow the model that they think it does.
yeah.
So,
I think
but
chemistry
anyway,
makes people
that's
feel safe because it is so black and white, and
oh yeah,
any of the subtle energetics are just harder to understand and therefore get lumped in the woo category.
oh yeah,
And
exactly.
woo to me just means like it'll be about 17 years before we figure out the mechanics, but
Sure.
I'd rather go with things that, my traditional framework of science is like you see the results first and then you
Yeah,
figure out how it happened later.
yeah,
Which
right.
is kind of the subtle, well, what subtle energy does. Just like, oh
Yeah,
wow, that did a 30% reduction in water consumption with the
exactly.
same vitality. Maybe we'll play with this as we go, but we're going to use this because
Yeah,
that's
and
hard to
so
deny.
when you think about that from from the economic perspective, without even considering what's it doing for the ecosystem at large,
Right.
and again, the name of what I do, what we call what I do, is natural ecosystem restoration, because that's what our whole premise is, this this creation was given to us to steward, and we don't understand how it works. And the way that need to restore it is a natural process. It's not all of these fancy things. And so that really causes me to appreciate the things that are natural, mimicking things, because that's
Mhm.
the way nature actually works. If we just get our hands off of it and we see what it's doing to restore and rebuild and do all of the things that it does, well, I mean, I think that's going to be the most effective and efficient way for us to do things. And so that's
Yeah.
what we're focused on, on trying to figure out in a way that's cost effective and beneficial for everyone involved. So the economics of that then get very simple. If I ask you if you'd like to save 20 to 30% on one of your greatest inputs in your business, would you be interested? Absolutely. Everyone would. So, okay, well, here's what it will cost you, because that's the first question. I would love to do that, but what's it going to cost me? So if I'm going to get a 30% improvement and it costs me 28%, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe it's not worth it. So that's the next question, is what's it going to cost me? And then I show you what it's going to cost you to get those four devices that you need to cover that whole quarter-mile sprinkler, which is actually applying the water on 120 acres. It's pennies. It's
Yeah.
pennies compared to what you're spending for everything else. And they're, oh man, I am in. I mean, it absolutely there, I mean, that man, if that really works, even if it's not near as good as what you're saying, the cost of that, if
Yeah.
it provides any benefit, is just over the top. Okay, what do I have to do? Well, here's the four devices that you need. And you get, I always imagine this, you see a dog that hears a strange noise, and its ears go up,
Yeah.
and it's like, and it cocks its head a little bit, and then it might cock its head back a little bit, and then it's like, I don't get it. I'm gonna get the heck out of here because this is just not making any sense anymore. And I mean, literally, you get that look, and it's like, I don't see how that could work. And again, it's because what's being applied, just like your incorrect assumption, is all of the water that you're trying to have an impact on has to pass through the device. No, it doesn't. In fact, a very small portion of the water only has to pass through the device. And
Just the
then the
fields.
resonance from that will
Yeah.
actually change all of the rest of it.
Wow.
And it's like, oh, yeah, well, how does that work? Don't know, but it does. And we can measure it. So anyway, you lose the conversation
Yeah.
so let's say it's, $2,500, with a 10-year guarantee. I mean, it's not even $1 an acre over the expected life of the equipment. I mean, I'm a regenerative ag consultant. I use a lot of biological products, plant nutrition products, lots of really good stuff. There is nothing that provides an ROI like structuring the water.
Mm.
Absolutely nothing. It's not even close. But I can sell plant nutrition to everybody under the sun who's interested in doing something different, because they think they understand plant nutrition. You can't grow a crop without fertility. So they think they understand that, and it's fine. But I'm saying there is no greater ROI than structuring your water because the benefits, and we don't even know all the benefits,
Right.
but besides all of the ecosystem benefits that we don't know how to measure, just the straight economics of what you're getting as a benefit in your business model of what resource you're utilizing and improving the efficiency and the effectiveness of that and reducing the amount required, it's unbelievable. But let's say that, and it's not too far off, that's a $2,500 investment. And it's like you get that funny look both ways. And then the response is generally, even though they don't verbalize it most of the time, you're just trying to take me for $2,500 because I don't see how that could work. And so there again, then that conversation started with the same person who said, just show me the data. I just want to see the data. Okay, here's the data. 30% reduction, 20% reduction. I mean, it was 30 the first year, and then we spread it out on multiple places, and we were 20 to 25. I mean, we had nothing less than 20% anywhere
Mm.
we could compare things. And so, that's kind of why I used, 20 to 30%. Let's just call it 20.
Yeah.
Who's not interested in that? That's substantial,
Yeah.
and you just want to see the data. Well, here's the data. So either you don't believe that this data is accurate, or you really don't make decisions based on the data. You make
Yeah. Hitting a
decisions
belief
based
system.
on what
Yeah.
you've been trained to believe about
Yeah.
something.
Belief
Because
systems are tricky.
when you can't get your mind around it, you're done. I'm out. Not you're just trying to take me for $2,500.
Yep.
It's like,
Yeah, I get it.
okay,
Oh,
yep,
fascinating.
it
Have
is
you
fascinating.
noticed anything? I mean, I don't need measurements or data in regards to this, but just I'm curious because the other side of water, so like molecular hydrogen, which is just a molecule, that has interesting effects on like stress tolerance, increase like tolerance of salinity, salt, heat, drought, things like that. I'm curious if you noticed anything, or maybe you never got the chance to because you were properly hydrating the crops. Did you see anything, notice anything else um, for sort of like vibrancy or post-harvest fresh, any other factors?
No, I mean, I would say by and large, and again, I don't have even, I don't have great data to support what we have typically seen is the crop performance is better.
Yeah,
And so some of those parameters that you're describing, resilience,
yeah,
resistance to, other stressors,
yeah.
those things are better,
Mhm.
but we don't really have a way to measure those
Yeah,
things.
right.
And even, even looking at crop performance by and large, if you get into the nutrient density conversation and you start thinking about what's really required to nourish a living body,
Yeah,
um, what's more important, a 1,000 pounds of, a certain quality, or 100 pounds of something that provides, much greater value. I mean, again,
right.
we're just, we're taught it's bushels and pounds. And and which is one of the things that drove me away from the commodity ag model was I didn't care anything about my life's work being, you know, meeting a minimum standard and nobody caring.
Right.
It has to meet this minimum standard. A bushel of corn's a bushel of corn. A pound of cotton's a pound of cotton. I mean, and it
Yeah.
does have, cotton does have a few things that are measured that actually determines its value based on how that lint is going to spin into thread and,
Hmm.
those kinds of things. So there is a little bit of value, but there's still no premium really for going over the top. I mean, like if you do it over the top, then there is no benefit. And so,
Yeah.
well,
Right.
why
That's true.
try? I mean, it's
Yep.
like it's the slave mindset, the employee-employer relationship thing where
Why bother? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it all pays the same. Literally, it
Right.
all pays the same. I mean, you show up and you get paid for the work. Maybe you're at 99% capacity today, and maybe you're at 30% capacity tomorrow, but it all pays the same. I'm not
Yep.
saying it couldn't have some impact on your longevity in that relationship, but bottom line is the law protects you for showing up. Well,
Right.
how is that any kind of incentive? I mean, it's like, I can't even ask you to leave because you showed up. It's like, I mean, I don't know any employer who, and I've never been an employer who actually wanted to pay somebody for showing up.
Right.
Now the reason that I need you to be here is because we have something we need to get done. I'm not interested in you showing up.
Yep.
But the other end of that spectrum is I get paid for showing up. I mean, it's like if you want me to actually do something, then you would have to give me a bonus.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's fascinating.
I got to downgrade this real quick because I know there's a bunch of people because usually when something pops into my head, other people. So if someone has a garden, like just way descale this whole thing, what would you say would be the easiest way they could try structured water for like just putting on a well, or if they have like a backyard garden and they wanted to just play with this, what would you
Sure.
suggest?
That device, just like you were talking about,
The
the
energy, this
one that
thing,
you just showed.
just
Yeah,
one of them.
that's I mean, that same body can be offered multiple different ways. So
Yep.
that's a portable device because it
Yep.
essentially
Yeah,
has a
there's no fittings
funnel
on it.
to
Right.
make it easy to pour into.
Yep.
That exact same body with garden hose fittings on it is called a
Yep.
garden device. And then that fits 3/4 inch garden hose.
Oh, cool.
And so you could put that on your spigot and then go through the hose. It's really better. We've determined, and this is why we use them on the center pivots the way that we do.
Yeah.
The greatest impact that that water can have on the resonance that's released into its environment is for it to be going through the flow form at the nearest proximity to its application as possible. So in other words, I
Okay.
wouldn't really want that at my house
Right.
and then run it through 50 feet of hose. I would rather have my hose connected to my house and have that device at the end of my hose.
So you want a stronger, you want the field or the vibrations closer to the ecosystem opposed to at the
Yeah,
source
they're
of the water.
closer to the release point.
Right.
So, kind of like if we look at that like a radio frequency,
Yep.
and I'm generating a radio frequency inside of a building.
Right. So
Well,
you
the,
want max
the
power.
longer it stays in that
Yep.
building, the less resonance it's going to have. And when we're talking about water and all the things that we're learning about water, and really one of the most detrimental things we do to water is pumping it
Yep.
under pressure.
Right.
Because the friction, and everyone knows this, if you've studied fluid dynamics or you've ever had to look at what diameter of pipe is required for a certain pressure to move a certain amount of water, everybody knows the scientific physics that go along with this, but they don't understand what's really taking place. So as that water moves down that pipe under pressure means that it's at high speed
Yep.
in that chamber. Well, the friction that's being applied to it is an energetic change that changes the bonds of that water. So even
Right.
if the water was really, really good at its source, by the time you pump it down a long straight tube at high speeds, it's not the same anymore because you changed it. So
Right.
all we're trying to do is change it back to the best that we can make it at its point of distribution so that where it's being released, it's going to have the greatest impact. So that garden device would be on the end of your hose,
Gotcha.
just prior to a sprinkler or just prior to your spray nozzle or whatever, so that we're releasing it as quickly as we can after changing it.
And the
Now,
next question would be, what do you think would happen if you didn't even pass the water through it, but you just had this in a garden somewhere? So the resonance, or does the water have to actually vortex and flow through?
the water actually needs to flow through it.
Okay.
Now, that that being said, you could do something interesting. We've played with this on some homes. Again, haven't had an opportunity to really collect great data from it, but if you had one water source that was just making a loop,
Yep.
wasn't actually being applied, but you just had water traveling through something in a loop,
Yep.
then the resonance that's going to be being released from that potentially is going to be having an impact on the other water that is being utilized. And I
Oh.
heard those things. I mean, I talked to an old farmer guy that, and I don't think he was lying. In a small little rural town that had with really houses really close in proximity to each other,
Hmm.
and he had treated the water at his house with a whole house device. So basically, all of the water coming into the house
Yep.
was being treated, and the neighbors in close proximity changed their water too, and they noticed the difference.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah,
Yep.
this is resonance is so weird to think about because same
Hmm.
company, Wellness Enterprise. I have the Cosmic Tower
Yep.
in my living room, and that's the same premise. Is it has a 250-foot radius. So like
Sure.
when you mess with resonance in water, it's almost a the scale is hard to believe. How
Okay.
far it stretches of
Right.
biological impact is really hard to understand sometimes.
No, absolutely. Well, so one of the things I was saying there, what we've toyed with a little bit in the house, a lot of the newer construction, what people like is having recirculating hot water so that
Yep.
you have instant hot water everywhere in the house. So that you essentially have that hot water that's being looped continuously back to the water heater. Put we put a device in that loop so
Mm.
that so that you actually have water movement that is resonating from that device continuously.
Is this the whole house version of the Aqua Energizer we're
It
talking
just
about?
depends on the size. I mean,
Yeah.
really,
Okay.
really, the difference is how much water needs to flow through it.
Right.
And
Okay.
so a lot of those applications, the same, a pivot device or,
Yep.
a garden hose type device would be sufficient because of the amount of volume that's continuously circulating. So
Yeah.
it's basically, determining the size is based on the pipe size and what
Yep.
that total volume of water flow is.
That's so cool. Yeah, I think we're just touching the surface with resonance and a lot of the human
Oh, yeah.
applications. So just not even agriculture. We're just barely starting to look at it. Like the interface of light, resonance,
Oh, yeah.
consciousness, DNA.
Sure.
Like there's a lot of eyeballs on it, but
Sure.
there's enough people that are doing the experiments now where it'll get real interesting in the
Oh,
next
yeah.
5 years.
Yeah. I
I'm
think
excited
so.
that you're doing it on a larger scale because oftentimes with regenerative ag, like I came from Asheville, North Carolina. There's plenty of small regenerative ag, but the problems
Sure.
with everything are how do you do this bigger? Like, is it
Sure.
just as effective bigger? So I'm really excited to hear that you're doing it, maybe not like massive industrial scale, but I
Hmm.
think, hundreds of acres is plenty big for a
Oh,
start.
yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of have a vision for a region that we're in the middle of,
Yeah.
kind of from the Rocky Mountains to the green belt where things start getting more continuously green,
Yep.
mid United States. And we feel like that's the place that we've been planted to have the greatest impact that we can
Yeah.
on that area. And so, we've planted lots of things. It's interesting if you look at where we work on a map with, map dots pinned. It's like
Mhm.
all of the perimeters have been set up, and we've started to do things there. And so I just see all of that eventually
Oh, cool.
growing together so that we're having a much greater impact on a much larger area than where we're actually doing it. Which actually that's a beautiful picture of the future for me is that we're
Yeah.
doing things in love and kindness that the beneficiaries of it don't even know we're doing it. And
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter. They don't have to, they don't have to pay us for the work. They don't have to acknowledge us. They don't have to pat us on the back. It's just like we just do the work because that's what we're created for. It's what we get up to do. So we get up and we do it. And the people who benefit whether they even know who's doing the work or not.
It's like planting a tree. You plant
Yeah,
it in 6 years, or
that's right.
someone might not know it was you, but they get to enjoy the fruit of the tree.
Yeah, that's right.
What's your range, Chad? So I'm sure, some people will be very curious about this. What's the geographical area that you work in, consult in?
I mean, it's really pretty global. I mean, now there's some practical aspects of
Yeah.
that are not, I mean, generally speaking, as far as, biological products and,
Hmm.
the things that we're shipping, plant nutrition products or any of that kind of stuff, it's generally speaking, a 300-mile radius
300
of
miles.
of the panhandle of Texas, but it's really only for that portion. I mean, I talk to people all over the country.
Yeah.
Not, some international.
Yeah.
I don't have a big involvement in an international community at this point. But, but everywhere I go, it's like this is the conversation. I mean, if
Yeah.
I'm in Virginia, these are the things that we're talking about. And, so and and then for obviously for water structuring, where there really is no limit on where you can send that kind of stuff.
Right.
There
Sure.
really is no limit for, where it can be done. Definitely there's a large international audience because it's so easy to
Yeah.
just ship things where you need, just like the cosmic towers. I mean,
Yep.
they're all over the
Yeah.
world.
Global impact very
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, pretty
What
simple.
is what's your company, Chad, and how can people find you?
It's natural ecosystem restoration. So that's www.natural, natural, restoration.com, all one word.
Okay, I'll put that in the description.
And as you know, I'm not a very techie guy. My website is, maybe functioning today.
Yeah.
It's I've never had a desire to, because of the things that I do, I don't really need a
It's true.
commerce
Yeah.
involved website. I just need, a placeholder that kind of tells the story so that I don't have to repeat the story all the
Yeah. So someone can call you and get a hold of you and
Yeah,
you're off
and
to the races.
and social media is kind of the same way. I mean, I
Yeah.
have some children that try to keep me a little more modernized with some Facebook and Instagram stuff, and that's natural ecosystem restoration too. So,
Okay.
you can find us there, but if you really want to know what's going on with Chad, you're probably gonna have to talk to somebody that's either with Chad
Yeah.
or Chad, because Chad doesn't do a very good job of letting the world know what he's doing. And
Gotcha.
I get it, I have at times had a strong aversion to that because I see what a distraction that it can be.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But I also understand that, it's hard for people to find what they're looking for if they don't know
Mhm.
who's doing it. And
Yeah.
so we're trying to be a little more available to let people understand what we're doing. We're really busy in this season right now, seed biopriming. So we're
Yeah.
we're putting biological extracts on seed and into seed, again at on thousands of acres because the biology is very limited based on the practices that have been very detrimental to those microbiological
Yeah.
communities in the soil. So we're putting a lot of that back into the seed and on the seed. And so, that's anyway. We're
If
busy
we can
every day. It's just a
if we can
matter of
find the time, I would, and if you have time, I would love to have a part two where we talk about everything else because this is a big, big topic. Just,
sure,
regenerative anything and rebuilding ecosystems for all of your other knowledge. I want to be respectful of your time
sure.
today. So this was a perfect length, and I'll put all the stuff in the description. But if you have willingness, I would love to have you back for
Oh yeah,
the
absolutely.
other side.
Yep, this is what I get up to do, and oftentimes I don't feel like I'm getting anything done because all I'm doing is talking.
Yeah. Yes.
But
Hey, you are a
but
great communicator, so we
well,
appreciate it.
thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I understand, everybody's on a journey that they've got
Yeah.
to understand what the next step is. And, when they're questioning, this doesn't really make sense, or I don't think this is right or whatever, then, most of these, I honestly try to avoid conversations a lot because most of the
Yeah.
things that I talk about, it's not an easy conversation. It's not
Yeah.
like a yes or no. It's like, I say one thing and that triggers another question.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you're 3 hours into a conversation and you're not anywhere close to done.
Preaching to
It's
the
just,
choir, Chad. Yeah,
yeah,
I do the same.
yeah,
Introduce more questions than I
that's
try to
right. You
answer
just
back.
got to find a place to quit because it doesn't all
Yeah.
have to be done today.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this chat, Chad.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
If you made it this far, I thank you so much for your attention to this. agriculture always fascinates me because it's kind of the foundation of our food system and our nutrition. It's where all of our nutrition comes from. And there are some pretty large problems in farming, as Chad went over, but we're also figuring out large solutions that don't have to bankrupt people, which is nice. If you found this valuable, give me a like, a follow, just so my content continually pops up in your feed. You can find Chad in the notes in the description at naturalecorestoration.com. And I'll have the links with discount codes for the water forms that we were talking about. And like Chad said, you don't need the massive ones. He was using just a series of the small ones paired together. And that way, if you have a garden, you can use one of their garden hose ones, or I use it just in my normal drinking water. All the links for those will be down below. And thank you again.